And welcome back. It's great to welcome you back. It's great to begin the summer semester, and I am certainly very excited. I know Yara is very excited. I just saw Peter a couple of days ago. He's excited, I know, and I know Theodore is excited. So it's going to be good. It's also going to be, it's sort of like torn between being a sprint and the long distance thing. There's something called long sprint. I don't know if that sort of fits with the, maybe that's what it is. A long sprint for the end of year. And as you know, that's set out in the German Architectural Museum this year. And the reason why that has not worked previously is because of calendars between the school and the German schools in general, the German academic calendar and the museum's calendar. But this year we're back on track. And that means we return to the museum and we have the end of year for the master thesis review. Not second semester review, but the master thesis review in the museum, end of June, as you know it. And of course, we're both very happy and very proud to have Tom Main, or Morphosis, to be the Dean's Honorary Lecturer during that event. So that will be end of June, and the lecture series sports no less than 10 guests. The first, obviously, tonight. And we also have one conference in there where we put out a separate announcement. And that's going to take place in Monsuntorm, the Performing Arts Center, and that is on the 4th of May. Now, as things go, and you will allow me, you can almost see this, but I think you all have an email, so you know the names, but let me still just run very quickly through it. And I think also the series really, in some ways, we tried a few years ago to do, quite a few years ago, to do a thematic lecture series, one that would sort of set a theme for the lecture series, and that was what it is, and then we recruited people or invited people to address a specific topic. And they were good by all means, but it also seemed a little bit contrived, and in particular also having a series that ought to reflect the sort of the reasonable spread of interests amongst the different studios, and in general reflect the focus and the thematic interests of the program. And that means that we end as we begin the series. We begin the series and we end the series with anchored in the discipline and the traditions of the discipline as we know it in terms of building design. And already next week you get somehow the spread when a neurophysiologist from the Max Planck Institute here in Frankfurt, and she works in the field of empirical aesthetics, and she will come and tell us what really lies behind the way that we perceive and understand and eventually construct our understanding of space. So that's Lucia Meloni. It goes on to Gert Stockmann, who studied here in the Staedelschule many, many years ago, and with his partner went on to actually have quite a bit of international attention. They did work that was largely then experimental, and they're also well known for a house just up on the hill outside Frankfurt, which has all these drawers. Or not all these drawers, it's basically one drawer, one big living room that you could basically pull out like or it can project itself out from the building like a drawer. And Götz joins us, the group, that company or group is called Formalhaut, and he joins us as part also of an annual lecture within our series, which is called the Stiftungslecture, or more precisely, Stiftung Staedelschule für Baukunst lectures. This is the same Stiftung that helps us with the Günther Bock Prize every year, and that was founded by Günther Bock, the once upon a time the man who led the architecture class. So May 4th, we are in Monsunturm, so not here, and that's the conference, Breaking Glass, number 2, and we will speak about the virtual image, where it's focused on the role of the subject, meaning the individual subject, and her or his relationship to space and to processes of so-called subjectification, meaning how we become subjects, and that's all reflected in all that work that goes on with in terms of virtual reality. This time around we do the virtual image, and if everything goes right, we'll do space and immersion in a year then from now, that is in 2020. Wolfgang Chapeller, who has been leading the architecture at the Academy of Fine Arts in Wien, and who has an office, a practice there, and a number of buildings to his credit, he will continue the lecture series in early May, and then followed by I think it's a 3-day visit by Jeffrey Kipnis. So Jeffrey Kipnis, the American theorist, joins us, and he will give a lecture on May 16th. And he promises to forecast architecture till 2050, asking what's left and what's right. So that's going to be entertaining, I believe. Florian Bösch is a German architect who ended up going to Tokyo many years ago. He worked for Toyo Ito, then went off and set up his own practice, and he has also quite a few buildings to his credit there. He visits us towards the end of May, just before Anna Neimark, first office, LA-based office, comes, and she's followed by Michael Osman, who's a theorist, and he's responsible for the PhD program at UCLA. And he also lectures in a separate series at the German Architectural Museum. So there would be every reason to hear him twice. And they are within the same week before the French architect Manuel Gautran visits from Paris, and she will give obviously a presentation of her practice and the numerous buildings that she has been responsible for designing and realizing over the years. And that basically spells out the end of the series with the review on June 26th and 27th, and Tom Main's lecture on the 26th. So I hope that you will enjoy this series as much as I believe I will. I look greatly forward to every moment of it. And I'm very honored and I'm very happy that you are here, Wolfgang Gollwitzer. And Wolfgang has an office that he opened in München all the way back in 2001. That's Studio GA. And already he has a number of realized buildings to his credit. Not only that, but there is also, I think there's something like 8 live projects currently live, and with possible expansion also not only in Europe, but also in Asia, and possible projects in Russia. And Wolfgang, he has one of those, you know, like I said to him a moment ago, there was I heard once that if one had a diploma from Germany, one could go to America and immediately one would get a job in Peter Eisman's office. It might be a joke, might be true, but I think the point is quite simply that, you know, there was something that was counted to, that a German architectural education was counted as one that was hugely solid in terms of practical insights and practical expertise in terms of how buildings are developed in an office and how they eventually are then carried out to realization. And I suppose in so many respects, Wolfgang represents that. He was educated at no less than 3 German universities. He took his diploma at the Technical University in München in 1997, before which he was both at Kaiserslautern and Zurich, ETH Zurich was also before. And then he went on, much like you have. You've come to do a master, and he went on to do a master at Columbia University, one that he finished in 1999. This was, of course, at the time when Columbia was, and I know that you know this by now, it was one of the leading, if not the leading, or it probably would share the title leading school at the time with the AA maybe. It was a time of the paperless studios. It was the time of Bernard Tschirmi's, the last days, I believe, of Bernard Tschirmi's, last period of Bernard Tschirmi's directing that school. And in fact, Wolfgang was there at the same time that our guest towards the end of last semester, Hernan Diaz Alonso, was also there. So they were studying at Columbia at the same time. And Wolfgang went on to work for both Libeskind and Reiser, saying that with a German R. One more time. Libeskind and Reiser and Umemoto. And you can imagine that this is basically sets out a certain conceptual weight and an approach to architecture, which, in combination with Wolfgang's background in German universities, promises that form of quality that is to be seen in his work today. And I think that his choice, and if you have also read his the announcement of the lecture, the choice of topic for the lecture, basically designed to build is the title, which means in short terms, how is it possible, or what are the challenges to follow up on and to somehow cater to all the design intentions that go into a project through those extremely often long, but also excruciating processes that takes an idea towards its final realization and realized form. And I look greatly forward to hear Wolfgang's thoughts on that. I do believe that it spells out for many of you what might be the future, and also for those of you who may choose alternative trajectories in architecture, it is nevertheless a question and a testimony to that which we are all about, and that is architectural design. So, Wolfgang, we're very happy that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you, Johan, for the invitation, and I really appreciate being here. It was quite short notice, but since I don't travel so far like other people, I think it was okay to come on short notice. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. It's quite full for the first day of semester, so this also I appreciate. And yeah, I want to talk about design to build, which I think is one of the most interesting parts in architecture. I'm not here to talk about theory in architecture. I think Jeff Kipnis or Kenneth Frampton are far better and far more interesting in talking about this. But I'm talking about how to have the background of theory, of experimental architecture, and put it into building, into commercial building, into buildings where the client is happy, where the budget is on budget, and finally the building is being built. Because there's a lot of design which is amazing, also of my office, and will never get built. So there's also a hard thing to really take what you learn and make it a building. And what is very interesting is that I have 3 alumni from Staedelschule in my office now. for a small school, that's quite a lot actually. And the background, of course, is amazing, that people are really open, free, and then they get the project manager on site and he says, oh, well, the handrail is not high enough. So, but it looks good, they say, and this is basically the small topics we fight with. But there's, of course, much larger topics about what's the design, what's good design, is it worth paying for it, and not only the big museums, which also have trouble of financing, but also smaller buildings. And I want to make sure that you really be free in school, like I was at Columbia University, that you really open up, but also have in mind later when you build, you always sometimes have to sacrifice, but always focus on the important parts of your work. And that's quite important, what I want to show you. As mentioned, I used to work for Daniel Libeskind, which was then a small, not quite well-known office, but I had the chance immediately after school to work on this project, Denver Art Museum, which we won the competition immediately. It was my first competition I did, and we built it. And what is amazing actually is not, I'm not talking about the design or anything, but we had a budget of 60 million and we had to convince the client to build this building. Toyohito was competing, who was on the board of the museum, so everyone expected him to win the competition. But then a part came in which I learned in Libeskind's office is to make the client engaged in your building. He gave speeches, he came to lectures, and he engaged the client into the design. And of course his wife, Nina Libeskind, who was a politician, tried to sell it. So this was amazing how this building was sold to the client. And that's when I learned, I mean, Daniel is a highly intelligent architect, but basically the buildings are sold by his wife, which was an amazing experience. So I learned that design is very important, but it's also important to talk to the client, to engage with the client. And of course, the budget, we were a little bit over budget, but at the end the budget was done. We just got cheaper in some material or anything, and got some sponsors for the titanium cladding, for example. And that's how we got the whole project on budget. And for me, as a young architect, just graduating from school, this was an amazing experience, of course. And I hope every one of you will have the same after finishing school. Since I worked at, or studied at Columbia, and I studied with Hani Rashid, Greg Lynn, and Jesse Reiser, so basically all experimental architects. We did movies, we started with Maya and part of scripting already at this time. And what was very interesting is that Jesse Reiser at this time was a very experimental architect, considered a digital architect, but he couldn't even send an email. So we did this project in Dubai, so that's what I modeled. And we basically modeled everything by hand first. We did wax models, and this is what I really learned there, is that architecture is still an art where you sculpt, where you model, and where your eye is important. So whatever you create with a computer, whatever you create through scripting, through generating by accident, you should always trust your eye and say, is it good, or is it good because the computer generated it, or is it good because you like it? And that's really what I learned there. So I really encourage everyone just to think about modeling, about the basic art. And since Staedel is an art school, so you have a lot of different topics. So I think this is a very good thing to keep in mind. This was very interesting, working with United Architects, with Ben van Berkel, Greg Lynn, Jesse, FOA, like all the people were together. And you thought that highly talented people create amazing design, but this was the outcome, so, which was, I think, for us, yeah. That's also a topic that you really have to be able to work together. The next project is a competition I did with Jesse and Anako in Vienna, which is actually the Angewandte. And Chapila won this competition. Wolf Briggs wanted to win, he didn't win. And we didn't win either, but we made a quite exciting building, which the function wasn't working at all. So we were hopelessly under program. So we had to, I think, like 3,000 square meters of school, but we only had 2,000 or 1,500 because we had a lot of open space. And I still don't know what Chappelle had because he couldn't tell it all in his design. But this shows, like, the Angewandte is a really experimental school. And I don't know if someone has been there recently. They built something completely different. They just did a small renovation and a small extension. And this, I think, is very sad. If a school that is worldwide known for experimental art and architecture then makes a huge competition where everyone was taking part, and then they choose a prize winner with an excellent design, and then they decide it's too experimental and you start building just like a small box as an addition, and I thought this is very sad, and this unfortunately happens quite often. But nevertheless, we had the opposite. We had a client in Ukraine, and he owns the football club, Shakhtar, and he said, I just want the most expensive, best building, and it should be for the next 50 years. So he was just the opposite of, and he didn't understand anything of art, and the art school in Vienna really did. So this was quite different. Sadly, I have to say that this is in Donetsk, and since the war, of course, the project stopped and died. The team still exists, though. Who's interested in football? Yeah. Talking about my recent projects from the last 10 years is basically design to build, which gives a lot of problem when you do experimental architecture and try to make it in a conventional building. It's function versus form. Yeah, you like a form, but it doesn't work as auditorium, for example. Sculpting versus parametric, you like a tool, but then you need to also work with it that it looks absolutely beautiful at the end. Program versus space, like we did the competition for the DFB, for the German football in Frankfurt, and the program basically was hundreds of small offices. So how do you create an amazing space when the program is lacking? So we changed the program. Of course, this wasn't good because we lost. But the next is color versus material. Is the space as good as it is, or do you need to enhance it with material? In digital age, mostly you create space when you work on the computer or when you do 3D printing without material. That means the way we are educated since the digital age is basically about space, about not so much about material. Like in a modernist way, when you had you choose this kind of marble because you always had a straight wall, you had a box, and then you choose material. And now I think the space is more important. So color and material is also very limiting the design. Then the next is one of the really interesting topics I have with every client is box versus shape. Isn't the box cheaper? I'm not sure, it might be, but it's also not sustainable because it doesn't stay in your mind. And that's what I think is also very important to create something the client really loves. And the next, old versus new, we have a lot of buildings, they need to be renovated all over Europe. And we always argue, do you want to enhance it and live with a bad building, or do you want to knock partially down and make a new building? And this is how we won the competition for a music theater in Lithuania. We didn't follow the competition rules and knocked down part of the building, and then we won the competition, and that's actually going to be built right now. And since the second last point, box versus shape, I also want to show which architecture is better. This is done by, the lower one is done by Michael Young and Kutan Ayater. I worked with both for a long time, so they're good friends, and I really hoped they could win, which they won, but then the other architecture was still better. So this is also a point, how do you convince a client to be really experimental or not, and it's hard to say which architecture is better. So this is also left to you. So I'm going to show a few projects. The first one is in Russia. It's outside Moscow, in the former capital of Russia. It has 47 churches and nothing else. and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it's like Rottenburg ob der Tauber here in Germany, and nothing modern has been built there. So the client wanted something traditionally small, and we had a more conservative building, and then we also decided we bring this. So we brought a landscape. It's a sports center. He wants to bring tourists to his hotel, and we showed it to the governor, who was an old communist governor still, and to the UNESCO World Heritage, and everyone went for the new project. So this was amazing to see that people who are used to this kind of building then suddenly go for this. So they skipped basically one level in architecture, the modernist area in between. And this is a sports center, a spa area for the old hotel. It's all in the landscape, all walls are tilting, nothing straight, which is also not the best for a sports center, but the client really loved it. And you see the plan here. So here you see the football field with a curved wall, where we had bleachers, and the other one with the seating. This is the pool area and the spa area. So the whole thing basically merges into the landscape. Also the interior we had quite reduced, a lot to shape and form, and everything was modeled and shaped like regular models we did. Then Putin got interested, so we had to put judo in. They got funding from the state, so we had different sports, and we also had to introduce a VIP area. This is the pool area. We have a ceiling which resembles their traditional color there, the flowers. And the ceiling is also in parametric design, opens up and closes, and basically covers the whole thing. And this is also for acoustic reasons. The building is currently underway. You can see it here. This is mostly snow in the winter. And we are hoping to get funding. The embargo is stopped the construction right now, but we hope that it continues next year. This is the picture from the lobby. Inside with the seating. The next is a competition we won in Austria. It's also a pool, and we managed to hide the whole building in the landscape again, which is in the mountain. And since they have an immense snow load, we had really big beams. And then we decided we reduced the span, but we didn't want to put columns, so we introduced more a sculptural column in the middle, reduced the span from 28 to 14 meters, and then the structural engineer came with a beam every 5 meters, and we said, no, we don't want to see any beams, we want to see a ceiling only. So we really started sculpting the ceiling, and of course it's a little bit inefficient in terms of structure, height and depth, and amount of material you use, but the whole ceiling creates an amazing space inside. You get different heights, you get different acoustics and atmosphere, and it's hugely successful, and people really love being there. It's near Innsbruck, and of course each part was different to make, and this was so successful we continued this also in the spa area. Here you see the floor plan. This is basically a rectangular building at the end. The ceiling was sculpted, and we decided not even the distance or the orientation, the shape, everything's different. So the lamellas get denser, they get less denser, they curve around certain objects, and the whole ceiling plan became a nightmare for the client. He said, who should ever pay for this? So we took a local contractor and sat down with him and said, it's not so difficult. Like, we give you a plan of a couple of 100 pieces. So we labeled each piece, had the MEP cuts in, had the notches, everything was done, and each one was different, of course. And he said, well, he just bought a CNC machine. I said, that's excellent for you to test it for the next few months. So he he was really happy about working with this, and this is how the rendering looks of the ceiling. So you see the flow, you see the different densities. And he actually managed to build it, and also the price was quite cheap. It was like 80 euro per square meter, which is amazingly cheap for a work like this. And this really works when you know about construction, when you know about design, when you know about how to produce those drawings into construction drawings. And that's quite interesting. And since it worked there, everyone's really happy, and it also is good for the people in the office to see things going through finally, because you keep working on those things for ages. Like here's other images. We even had money left for backlit marble from Turkey, which was then very nice there for the whole atmosphere. And this was also for the lobby. It's near the glacier, so we wanted to have the ice feeling, so we wanted icicles from the ceiling. The little dots are the icicles. So they're arrayed in the field, so we applied force to the objects, and the field was arrayed in different steps. We needed to step because of MEP also, but there's also the entrance in here. And the question was how to make this a building. So we got the first offer. The first offer was 1.2 million euro. Then we sat down again with a company and basically drew every little stick, made rectangles, and printed out in full size and put them in the wall, and told them, you just mount it here, each point. And at the end, we came down to 60,000 euros. So this was amazing, how you really need to transform the architecture into construction. And that's how the ceiling looks. So it looks quite like icicles hanging from the ceiling. And the same applied to the floor, also by a field which we generated with a computer. And that's what I mean by trust the computer and trust your eye. Like we applied force, but then at some point it looked too artificial, not handcrafted. So we deliberately put some mistakes into it and tried to make the whole floor pattern more hand sculpted. And this then was also transformed with a one-to-one print on the floor. And this was the rendering, and they actually managed to build the whole thing. Here you see the ceiling again. The next one is a project I was mentioning before. Sometimes you just wait for ages. Like we got the commission in 2011, groundbreaking was last year. So. No, actually this year in January. Building permission we got last year. It's a small project. It's in a nature resort. Very beautiful landscape. You wouldn't be allowed to build, but the zoning is from the 60s. And it's a city in the south, and they don't want to spend any money. So this was very hard, and we said, you have such a beautiful landscape, you need a nice pavilion. It's a very small building, and we said we don't do a building, we just do like the foggy landscape. We do a facade, just a few metal stripes. Wherever the entrance is, we pinch them up. Wherever we need ventilation, we twist them, like what has been done several times. And at the end, you just, wherever you need a window, you dissolve them. And dissolving was actually the biggest problem with the material, because you just can't go to nothing. So we just twisted them and rotate, so it looks like they would dissolve at this point. And the whole elevation looks like this. So this is the elevation of the building, wrapped around the whole building. And then we presented this to a very conservative city council. And then everyone loved it, which is also amazing, because you really have to prepare the people how to see something which they haven't seen before. And the only comment was, do the corners need to be round? That's expensive. So, not talking about the facade or anything, which is really expensive. And those are the construction drawings where we have to really manage to transform what you see here into construction drawings on the site. The lamellas are twisting, the fixtures, and you need the gap for cleaning, everything, so this is quite intense in terms of work. This was done quite fast, and then you spend years doing this. Next one is another Russian project. When we started the one you saw, I was picked up in Moscow at the train station, and they brought me to the airport, which takes 3 hours, so we discussed the project in their bus. And this is on the polar circle, which is basically currently it's minus 20 degrees there and snow. It's an area where they get gas out of the ground, and no one wants to live there, so they have to produce infrastructure, sports centers, theaters, ice hockey rinks, swimming pools, all this. And you see this is the buildings they do currently, and we did a building which is a very standard building, like this is the inside. You cannot buy anything there. You have to bring everything by train or by truck or by plane there. So we have a very standard steel building inside. This is all prefab like any other factory. The whole building is elevated 140 above ground, so it's floating. And they have a certain pattern of the local tribe there. And we applied this pattern, and this was also important to sell to the governor, modern building. They always want something traditional in it, as they say in Russia. And so what we did is really having a skin around the building, and the pattern is scripted along depending where openings are, where VIP is, where the entrance is, and also at night. The night image was very important, and which also sold this project to the governor, because it's mostly dark there. And then at night you really only see the lit skin around, like a scarf around the building. And they actually started construction. That's a picture of the summer. Here you see all the steel beams, and then they put the cladding and then the skin around. One of the main projects of the office is a box, basically. It doesn't look like a box, but we sold it as a box. We got a commission. A colleague of mine started with an extension of this. This is an existing pool. And you see it's done in a modernist way. And we said, why don't you just make a simple box in front? Just put a box and don't spend all the money, but make the box beautiful. And we argued, this is the existing structure, this will stay. The existing structure is quite dark, and we said make a box that's much bigger, so that you get light into the building. Budget was around 14 million at this time. Then we said, don't put columns at the end, put columns in the middle, and hang the existing structure to the new one. But don't put many columns, just put columns like a tree, bigger ones. And this project is in a nice park. There's old trees, 50, 60 years old. And then we did the floor plan, and the floor plan is almost a box. We just tweaked it a little bit. It's totally straight to the connecting building. And of course everything could be argued, because here you want to be in a pavilion looking out to the landscape. Here you have an entrance, so you tweak in, and here you see the position of the trees. So we put the trees, and you see the size of the trees, and then we said, wouldn't it be nice if the trees grow together at the top? And then the box evolved in a more and more complex way. You see the plan changed. It was a really step-by-step, which was very important with the client, that he was really educated about this building. And then we came through, and then we did the presentation and presented this thing to him. And then he said, well, we cannot pay for this, this is impossible. And we explained it's nicer, and he said, of course, it's much better than what he expected. And then he agreed. He called the mayor, he called his board, and now we're actually in the midst of construction. You see, we have 3 trees here. And the steel structure is connecting and supporting the new and the old roof. This is the inside. What is very interesting is also when you work with consultants like MEP or structural engineer. The structural engineer said, how should I calculate this? So he started, and then he was actually very interested and totally got into it. And the tubes are 160 millimeter diameter. And after 2 months he came and he said, I managed to reduce them to 112. And I said, yeah, we check it, and then the whole building looked so flimsy, we lost the whole shape. And this is also that when a building looks too engineered, it looks like an engineering building. And we said, no, we want 160, but he said it's a waste of material, but we say it's not about the material, because the material costs are not important, it's about the space. We want to create a surface out of pipes. And you see it also here, once you start reducing the diameter, and that's the back and forth engineering, then you lose the whole shape. And this was incredible difference of just a few little centimeters. And that's what I also love about this project, that we are totally overstructured, but the space needs it. Here you see the complex curves, and the whole thing looks a little bit arbitrary or wild, but that's the way how we designed it. We really did 3 trees. This is done in Maya. So we had low polygons, tried to merge them together, simplified it a little bit, and that's what I'm talking about modeling. Like, the computer does a lot of work, but then you have to trust your eye, and you see, like, here there's some issues. So we started reducing the amount and do subdivisions and then really start modeling. And suddenly we have a skin, which we then applied with a grid, with a regular grid, and then the regular grid is following the knots, and the knots are giving the curvature to the pipe. And then the whole thing looks unorganized, but it's a pretty organized system. But it's also modeled, so that's what I'm talking about. Modeling with computer generates the shape, but you always have to control the shape with your eye. Here you see how it was tracing the splines. And of course then we had the issues, spline versus arc. I think this is quite familiar sometimes, that splines really don't work everywhere. And we validly engineered this. You see the one color is spline, the other one is arc, so we managed to make this quite similar. And gave everything to the steel company, and like we have 950 knots, each one has to be welded 4 times, so that's quite a bit of welding. The facade columns, and then the structural engineer still wanted some vertical columns to connect the top shell with the bottom shell, so the load can transfer. So we introduced the least amount necessary, the edge to hold the facade and the existing building. And it was basically done in 2 parts. And this is the steel company. So the whole thing was bent in Holland. There's a steel bending company which can bend splines, actually, we found out later. We transformed everything into arcs, and then they said, oh, you could have given us splines too. So we basically wasted a month of value engineering this whole thing. But you see there's the very smooth curvature going through. Like, this is the top part, and it's welded together here. And they had it in parts, and then those parts were brought to the construction site and put up together. So this is just recently. Like, each object is an object on its own, basically. Here you have a different function, different program. That's why there's no cross columns. The second tree. And this is one of the roof parts, and they put it together on the parking lot, and then got a really big crane and started lifting it over. And here you see little things like edge beams and little sticks for the roof cladding. And what was really amazing is that usually when you're on construction site and you deal with companies, they all say, we can't do this. And with this design, the steel company really didn't bother about us being late for drawings or anything. They really wanted to produce this building. And that's what I also like about making this kind of architecture real, that people are really engaged, like, because they might do this once in their company history, and they were really engaged in this whole project. So it's, the whole roof is being lifted over, and it fit. And like here you see the joints, and everything is just like in the computer model. Every single stick is just like in the computer model, and that's really amazing. We had to, of course, those sticks are not modeled. This is all done by scripting and like Grasshopper. Here's the other part, and yeah, they're finishing the roof end of April. So, and that's when the really exciting part is done at this project. And yeah, talking about the budget was 40 million. The budget is now by 17 million. And the client is really happy, and he was willing to pay 3 million more to get this roof actually. Next one is in Dachau. Just briefly mentioned it. It's also a box. It goes around the tree. That's why we had to bend it, which was good for us, of course. And the inside is basically like a. We have a layer of cladding. We have a layer of timber. And the inside we wanted also over-structured beams, so that beams create the shape. I think that's quite important in our design, that the space inside is not pure structure or space, but the space becomes the structure. So at some point the beams are also over-dimensioned in the middle, but this was very important for the shape, for the direction of the building. And in this project we had the issue of each beam is different, and they're quite big. Like in the small project in Austria, you could see this, but those beams you can see they're 30 meters long, and each one has to be laminated. That means the glue lam is being used for a week, just for one piece. So we had always to make 4 pieces the same. That means we had to adjust between the shape and the construction. So you basically take over the little cuts away, and then you just add a little bit to each one and then cut away at the end again. So you always use the same shapes. This is currently being built, and that's also a view from the entrance. It's also in a beautiful park, and this also was a big discussion, of course, about budget. Why can't we do a simple box? It's cheaper, but at the end it's not cheaper because most of the building is MEP anyway nowadays. This was a small project also in the south. You see here it's a renovation project. The existing, which is a medical treatment, but medical like for mud treatment, like not a hospital, but more like spa medical treatment. And we basically knocked down the whole existing and build a city in there. A city with a space here, and each part gets its own room. And we had 3-dimensional walls bulging in 2 ways, deforming the space in there. And the whole space, since it's mud and wood, we had the left part is mud, the right one is more regular treatment, and we had this transformation between the 2 colors, between the 2 materials. And this is also scripted, but also then done manually. So the whole wall was done in an unrolled surface, and we had issue with the double curved patterns. So how do you bring a regular pattern on the double curved? And what we then did, because we couldn't really model on the computer and we didn't trust it, we started doing paper models on site. So we really at some point tried to figure out how do we with a contractor decide where the pattern starts, where it ends. And this is then the real built thing. Like this is exactly like in our computer. He really followed all the pattern. And as you see, they all meet in the corner, and he really did an amazing job with us drawing this thing. And we had another room. This was the rendering. We wanted a very special room. It's called the couples room, where 2 people can use it. And this should be like a cave with a special light in it. And also an issue was, how do you build it? How do you pay for it? And this was actually quite simple. This is the finished. It looks just like a rendering. And this is actually one of the easiest things to build, because you just basically cut the foam and glue together. So it's basically like building a model in big scale. And it also was built in the factory and came in 4 parts, and they put it together. And here you see they're mounting their lights now in it. The next project we didn't build, which we tried to push and push, and then it's called the Platinum Arena. It's an ice arena in Russia, and at some point the client really said it's getting too expensive. He owns a platinum mine, but still he couldn't pay for it, he said. So we're currently reducing the design and go back to a more simpler shape. But I hope to push this through, but we're still waiting for this. Another project was also a project we took over from another architect. The client wasn't happy. We were in Lithuania. We did a quick sketch at the airport, and this is actually a sketch done before the building, because usually architects present sketches done after the building. And it's on a very beautiful lake in Austria. Amazing. No one could build there. All the houses are the traditional houses with a sloped roof, and if you build a flat roof, you get drowned in the lake, I think. And this was our idea, to really have the mountains which are in the background as a part of the building. And the building is very three-dimensional. Here you see the sketch transformed into the building. And what you see here is that it is 3 levels, but each level connects to the next level. And once you stand at the bottom, you see the next level. And what is really amazing is when you look at the site, this is the site, and you basically have walls that are 1,000 meters tall around. And they are really amazing. And the building is like a puppet house within this whole landscape. Those are the floor plans. And the model was done through studying basically how does it go up, how does it go down, where do you see the landscape. And that's how all the openings were defined. And when you stand at the building, at the finished building, you're standing on the first level, but you see like there's different levels above, different levels below, and you see always the mountain and the lake in the back. And that's what I'm talking about, that you not only have a wall here, but the landscape becomes part of the building. So the building really becomes 1,000 meters tall. And when you stand here, this is an amazing view. If you drive by on Lake Aachensee, and this is publicly accessible, and this became the new town square. Like, people have a cafe there, people meet the mayor there, and this is really amazing how this evolved into a public plaza. So it's much more than we imagined. Here's views from up and down, from the rooftop to the terraces. On the upper terrace, also quite beautiful in summer. And we also had the view from the lake. So the view from the lake, it was important to have glass because you want to see out of the building. This looks almost like a modernist facade curved to the lake. And this is the inside. The structure is held up by one column, which holds the whole building. And also the roof structure is shaped not structurally the most useful way, but in a way that is sculpted. Here's the pool. And the inside is very open, very bright space. And this was at the opening, which is the street facade. And you see they're really traditional still. And they have this for every public building. They have a traditional opening with a head of Tyrol. And they're all standing very proud in front of this building. And the back facade was really very complicated. We wanted to have floating discs. So this was basically a building that holds up itself. So we started with patterns. We tried to design in different softwares. How does it work? How does the pattern work? And as you see, you can model it, that the disk is floating, but what does it hold up? So this was very, very painful. And then we came back, we inverse it. So we said, we just do a regular pattern, do scripting, and have the facade being inverted. And as you see, we really got, not encouraged to continue with this, because this looked very sad. And that's when we tried to fight for the facade with the client. The building was almost to open, and we still didn't know how to build the facade. And everyone said, what are you doing there? So we generated the facade again with pattern, a little denser. We tried to connect them, which also didn't work, and then we decided we put a substructure behind. But also the pattern work was quite intensive in our office, how to produce a pattern that looks good. So we used scripting, we used different modeling tools, and at some point here's one purely computer generated, and here's a pattern slightly modified by hand. So we really tried to combine what I mentioned at the beginning, UI, the computer, the generating, and the modeling. Like the architecture's ownership of his work should also be there. And this is what we came up then. It looks more like a paintbrush, like a big spray on the facade, and that's how it should look like. It should look like it's handmade, but it's not. And this was the final budget, size, us happy, and that's how it was built then. So this was really transformed one-to-one. We have the sticks in the back, but the effect of floating discs is really there. And of course, 1 million cars drive by every year, and people really look at this building. And we managed that the building is recognized without people knowing what it is. So that's the way when you drive by, you really see it floating. This was different examples how we try to do it. And this is a close-up, which I usually don't show. I only show it here because people, and this is from the back, so. But that's only pictures to show how we did it. And that's a recent image from the winter with the 3 dimensions. The next project is what I talked about, old and new, is the music theater in Klaipėda in Lithuania. And the tower is a 80s Soviet tower with offices, and it used to have an 80s theater. And they wanted to renovate the 80s theater and extend it, which both didn't work space-wise, construction-wise, and aesthetics. So that's when we decided to knock down the existing building and build a new one. And the design, of course, helped to convince the jury, to convince the mayor. And what is here very interesting is after winning the competition, the design had to follow all the rules. We got the acoustic consultant, we got the site limit. The client always wanted 700 seats. We said we make it smaller, looks better, but he insisted on 700 seats, and then the red line is the sight line. So you see it's all very packed there. So we tried different options to orientate the theater, and then decided orientation towards the front with a foyer below. Of course, it's the best because you want to look at the river. Here you see the lobby, the building above. The building has it's a regular theater, and at some point I said, well, it starts looking like Neufeld, but at some point the acoustic guy, of course, said, that's exactly why it works. And we wanted a bigger balcony. The balcony was cut back because you don't hear under the balcony, and all the shapes are following the acoustics. So we really negotiated with an acoustic consultant how the design of the interior space works. You need the sight lines, the proscenium, you need the backstage, and everything is pretty much set. But we still managed to create an exciting space inside, and also the lobby, how you go up, how you enter the spaces. And this is basically theater stage technology in the back, which is totally standard. Delivery truck, all this has to be taken in account there. And this is the lobby space, and that's how we managed to get the height of the building. So you walk in from the river, and then you can look up all the way to the top tiers. And here you see the structure, the timber cladding with a perforation. For acoustics, the seating arrangement, the balconies, then of course in the middle they need the television space, which also needs to be very prominent, so they take away the best space there. And we designed all the material and lobby space again. And this is then the auditorium, and what is actually very nice, it's a very dense auditorium. We have 700 seats, but they're all very close. Before they used to be 35 meters long, and now they're all below 27, 28 meters from the auditorium. So it became quite wide, and that's currently under construction there. Another project is in Thüringen, just on the way, and here we build a shell, like a timber shell. We have a extremely good structural engineer. He's in his late 60s and he works in Rhino, and this is amazing. So he's far ahead of his people in his office, and we work back and forth. But the biggest discussion we have, we want a shape and he wants a structure, and then he says the shape doesn't work with the structure. So we want it flatter. He says it needs to be an arch to become a shell, and that's how we always work back and forth. He sends a Rhino model, we send it back, he sends it back, and that's how we're working on the shape. And here you see the cladding pattern, for example. This is inside the shell. And this is part of the Rhino model, and also the modeling is quite important. You see all the CV points, and we basically discuss each point with a structural engineer. Can we go up? Can we go down? Can we go up? Can we go this way? And we always fight for our shape, he fights for his, but at the end we really now have a structure we are both happy with, and that's currently being built. This is the cladding, which is also prefab, because you cannot really do it on site. And that's the way how we do the cladding, each part. And here it's all okay, but then you get a curve and you have a transition. And how do you do the transition point? We did it also in Grasshopper in scripting, but then at some point you really can tell differences, and that's where we started. You see it here and here, where we also started to go back and fix each one manually. So this was quite important also, to always trust your eye and really follow what you learned as an architect. And here you see all the different elements that are currently sent out to construction. And here you see the shape of the building, double curved timber, quite good actually, and this is currently being done. Roof is hopefully finished also next month, and that's how it looks when it's finished. One more project about sculpting is this. We won second prize in Lithuania, and it's a very sculpted, like almost from interior sculpted project. We started with simple triangles, put them together, and tried to make them a shape. This is done in Maya, and this is really working like a sculptor. You have different polygons, you have different angles, you have different curves, and each one was sketched and shaped. Here you see parts of the model. And then, of course, brought into Rhino and cut and extruded, and then the building was finished. So it was quite a fast project, but highly modeled. We only won second prize, unfortunately, because they were a little scared of the budget there. That's the problem in the competition sometimes, because you cannot really convince the client directly, because you have to go through a jury. Here's the section. You see the staggering system of the topo lines. The whole thing is also in the ground. And view from outside, like the cave, like a cage in the inside. Also in Bremen, we had a similar system. This is a public plaza between two buildings, and the idea was to bring together those buildings with raindrops, and they're intersecting. You see it on the plan. And then we tried to model everything and landscape it. The city came, they said they want more green. We really wanted just a architectural square. They said it's too architectural. We put in more plants, but then all the topo lines become projects on its own. They became benches, steps, escape stairs. Those were existing escape stairs we had to move in. And also at night, how the light works. We didn't want big lights on the top. The escape stairs had to be lit, the existing buildings. And that's how the whole thing looked at night. One project an alumni from here is working on, Eva actually, and she's working on this for almost 2 years. It's in Freiburg, and it's small pavilions. She worked on them all, did the design, and is pushing it through, and we are now in detail phase. So there's a lot of small pavilions like this one, outdoor space this here. This is the existing building. And also this one. They also wanted a regular box extension, but we also convinced them, especially here's a hotel, and once you look against a straight wall, you really look against the wall. But if you look against a curved pavilion, then your eye goes around, basically, around the corner. So this helps to convince the neighbor to accept this building very close to his house. And we also worked with the shape a lot, and also the material. This is in a park, and here you see all the timber structure on top. And there's a third pavilion, which will be built hopefully in 3 years, which is another small restaurant pavilion, also on the outside. This is done in Russia. We did a quick design which is going to be built. The client asked us to help out with an arena in Rostov. Also the cladding here designed in both parametric and handcrafted design. And two more little projects I want to show. One is also done by alumni from here. We had a commission for a very small learning pool, 8 million budget. We also tried to convince the client not just to do a wall and a roof, but to have a nice shape. You see in the logo already. And this is basically the building. This is the plan how we started. A rectangular building with a rectangular basement, and we said we don't want the basement, and the plans are now like this. And the mayor said he can't decide, and I had to present it in city council, and the whole city council voted for the building, like for the budget extension and for the building. And this is also lovely when you work on project and you put all your design into it, and then the client says, or the city council says, yeah, we want to pay for this, we want to afford it. We did a lot of model studies, how the shape looks, how it works. This is a lot we do in our office, is basically studying shapes. And that's how the building will look like. You see double curved facade, that's the existing school building, and the pool is elevated to the top. They wanted it on the ground floor, but we said it's nicer because you look out to the landscape, so we don't have a basement. You walk in here, change, and go up to the pool, and it becomes a very nice pavilion in their landscape. Oops. The last project, that's the last one. I want to show the project in Jianing. Thank you. I've recently been to China, and I worked with a client, and the client asked, how do you work? I've seen what you do, and how does it work? So I said, well, first we should have a contract, and then we start working. And he said, yeah, but how do I know I like it? And then I said, I design you a villa, and then we'll see. So I came back a few weeks later with this design. He owns the whole mountain there. But he has no view because the trees are tall. This is one of the biggest bamboo forests in China. So I said, I design your house on the top. And he says, but we need some Chinese elements with it. So I said, well, there's a lot of bamboo and we can use it as a structure. And which also helps for this building, because it's not only the structural core with the elevator and the stairs in the middle, but also the shell around not only gives privacy to the building itself, to each space, it also helps create a pattern and relationship with the nature. And this was very important to the client, and now the client really wants to do a few more buildings, and that's how we got into this market. And it's very exciting. I met his family, I stayed at his father's house and everything, so he's 90 years old. And it was really amazing how architecture and design, what you learn, what you did, and always trust that you really do the experimental stuff, and the client will know after a while that you can trust it. And he expected something far more traditional, like a villa, and I said, this is a villa, how a villa should look like. And that's how he's now very much into the work, into developing new projects. And I think you have a great school here, and you really learn experimental architecture, and I'm totally convinced, having a few alumni from the school here, that everyone will really make its way and have a great future ahead. But you always have to take into account, this is an experimental school. Once you do architecture, you always have to sacrifice, and you have to focus on what's important. Like, you cannot focus on every detail in every project, but like the one in Aachensee, we really wanted to build the facade still. Till the end we didn't know how to build it, but we managed to build it, and we sacrificed a lot of other things inside to have the facade built. And this is what I learned also from my beginning at Liebeskind's office, that you have an idea and you really want to push it through, and once you convince the client, then you win, and then the project goes on. You have the construction companies and everything. You still have to work on floor plans that work, unfortunately. So a bedroom is a bedroom, a bathroom is a bathroom. The toilet needs space, so you need shafts for MEP, for ventilation. But after all, the shape of the building and the building is what you design, and it's your ownership, and that's what you learn here, and that's what you should produce. And of course, he was happy about this view, like the first time he can really look out. And that's how I want to close my lecture about recent projects, and thank you again for having me here.
Question or two?
Can you talk about shape versus blocks and material versus color and everything?
Yeah.
And also you talk a lot about cost.
Yeah.
How cost is involved in the process design. And I would like to know, how is the process of your office? Like, basically, how do you start like designing?
The best example is actually this, the white steel structure that's just being built, the double bend curves. We start laying out the project or the program, and we try to make the building work, because if it doesn't work, then the client might not like it at all. That's a big chance. So we try to work out the function at first, but then immediately the shape should be part of the function. So we always try working, of course we work in computer models mostly, do a few 3D printings, but mostly computer models. And then we try to define the functions that they work and then put the shape with the functions. So the client sees it's not just a project that's totally unrealistic, but it's something he likes, and that's even better what he imagined. So beginning with the shapes, like beginning mostly skins or shapes, that's how we work, and then we generate patterns to it, we generate structure, but mostly it's modeling. It's real, basically like having clay but on the computer. Yeah, shaping with a knife.
I was also thinking about the same. In fact, you had 6 points that you said were like one was actually you have mentioned box versus shape.
Yeah.
And basically, but you also say now that when you kick off, you basically prioritize function somehow. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, of the box versus shape is a discussion I don't like, but I have to do with the client, because he's not educated that the box is not necessarily much cheaper than a shape or whatever. But to do this, the function has to work. So to get into the discussion, which I mostly need to do, is function, that function works. And function versus shape is also a big issue, which we have a lot, which we had with the music theater. Like, we wanted a total different shape of the ceiling in the auditorium, but then at the end it's the function of the acoustics, and that's what we had to sacrifice. So the function really is a big influence in architecture still.
I understand that, but it seems it also seemed to me not to necessarily be, and I really appreciate, I mean, I enjoyed the lecture a lot, both seeing the work, but also your accounting for it, and obviously also with both passion and humor about all this sort of down-to-earth, but also very, I'm sure at times very challenging meetings with clients and whatever authorities otherwise. And then I thought, now when we speak about it, that for instance those two things, I understand the negotiation, understand the need to be able to accommodate the program, or so to speak, convince the client that everything is okay, it's going to work.
Yeah.
But I also don't necessarily see shape being the counterpoint or the opposite of that. In fact, I would even imagine that some of the projects you have shown basically would prove what I'm saying. Quite stunning was there was a swimming pool, and you have this quite sculpted ceiling inside.
Yeah.
And this is when you work with an engineer, and the engineer tells you it's an arch.
Yeah, we want
so I understand an arch to be seen as, you know, meeting a structural requirement. And yet again, it seems to me also to be a very fine, and must be a hugely much fun and very productive exchange with the engineer, finding that a certain way of sculpting that ceiling is actually coincides with the structural requirements that we need to be set for. Which is not, and I don't see that as a sort of strict opposition between form or shape, as you call it.
That's quite true, especially in this building, and function is all relative. As you saw, we mostly have wide-spanning projects. And of course, this is far more fun to work with those kind of functions where you have 2,000–3,000 square meter of open space. And they're not necessarily always rectangular, so you really can shape it. And this is quite nice with this kind of typology, versus when you come back to housing. So I have not really shown any housing project where you have bathrooms, and especially social housing, where really limited. And that's kind of function that I think influences architecture more. But you're right, this kind of typology actually creates architecture, or it creates space, or gives the opportunity to create space. So it should not always be a function versus shape, but also shape through function, or function through shape. So I think this is also a very interesting notion in the work. Yeah.
Do you find that through the so when and on what occasions do you find the opportunity to push the boundaries, or push the boundaries for what you do, or what you pursue as a design interest? Is that in competitions? I
find especially competitions in Germany are quite rigorous. So they're very limited. The jury has its own idea what they want. The program is quite strict. It's very interesting because we tried several competitions in Germany, also with Jesse Reiser, and worked on really multiple competitions here, and then we won the competition in Lithuania, where the people are more open, and also the competition was with a presentation, so you really could convince the client that their different design from what he knows is important. And I think the best to push it is to talk to the client directly, because ultimately the client is about to decide what design is going to be built. And the relationship architect-client is one of the most personal relationships, because it's mostly 4 to 5 years for bigger buildings, and you basically see him all the time, and you really, especially when you design a house for him, that's very important. So the social argument in design, I think, is also very important. Social meaning in between people.
But internally in the office now, because in some ways we've also made made a very nice account. It's a little bit like your own journal with respect to clients and the various settings, public settings that you're exposed to. Seeing then how you basically managed to push the design agenda and care for those things that you deem necessary or that become possible. But I was wondering, in the office alone, because I would also think that throughout all this project, there's also a certain design agenda that's being developed, an in-house somehow set of design interests.
Yeah, that's a huge discussion in the office actually. Since whenever I went to Liebeskind, I knew exactly what to do, because or if you worked for Zaha, then you know what to do. And with this, it's quite different, that people come but don't know the work yet. It's not highly published. We're busy building. We actually just thinking about this. We hired a PR agent to publish everything to get the work out, because that's actually a big problem, that people don't know exactly what to do in the office, or they don't know what's the way to work, how to design, how is the fastest way to achieve the best result for me and the client. And this is, I hope to solve it more to publications, through online presence, through everything, but this is really a big topic we are dealing with in the office. And we are working on it.
So I'd like to ask, what is your basis or definition for the term shape? Is it the need for programming or scripting? For that reason why you term something as a shape, and while you are putting a difference between a box and a shape. And the second question is, what are the principles or the, should I say, formula of your design basis, especially when considering the lines of representation and articles?
So why is there why do I differentiate between box and shape? Yeah.
On what basis is it the need for scripting, or is it just about anything that is not flexible?
No, what I think is the scripting or ZBrush or whatever tool you use, I think should just be a tool. The ownership is still with the architect. So. Of course, it creates good effects, a lot of things we couldn't do without the tools, but at the end it's all about your own work. So what I'm saying is, a box, you have a lot of limits with a shape, because it's a rectangular thing, and you work a lot with material or purity, and what I like is actually dynamic spaces, so that the spaces are shaped by function, by program, by different structure or whatever. So I think designing a shape is far more interesting to evolve the whole parts of architecture than designing a straight box. And that's what we try to do in the office. And of course, everyone who comes to my office is also working in this. I actually had one girl from Hong Kong University. She was amazing in designing shapes, and she said she hates it. She did a few projects I showed, and she was so good. Her eye was just perfect, and she says, "I want to do a straight box."
What would you say is like the most effective or efficient for the strategy that you say you convince a client to actually go over budget? Because to my experience, it can't actually be the aesthetics alone that are that convincing for someone to go, I don't know, a few millions over budget.
I'm not saying it always works. I mean, it works when you frank area, you just say it's over budget, period. So this helps, but I think since it's public buildings, you mentioned that it's public money, and you don't. It's not like you spend 200% more. It's like you spend a little percentage more, and this basically sells it to the client that you try to improve the quality of the building with just a little percentage more of the budget. Not saying I want double the budget, but it doesn't always work. But it's mostly, since it's public buildings, it works because, like a pool, more people come. And like we had this pool near Innsbruck, they expected 120,000 people. First year they had 200,000, and that's quite a good argument for the next client to see, like, he tried to be a little bit more experimental, and he got people there. And people, even if it's people don't know why they like the building, most people go in and out and say, well, I really liked it, but no one can explain it. And that's the unconsciousness of public architecture, I'd say, that people really don't know why they like it. When we go to a building, we discuss every little detail, and they just create the atmosphere, and I think the atmosphere is quite important of a building, and this mostly tries to convince the client.
You did another project, which was a wrap it up, I think, but you did another project where you had a box interior, where there's, I can't remember, whether these are offices or whether it was a spa. You showed one photograph of, you had a hallway, and you said you thickened the wall.
And you have
an interior view, and the wall goes like that. That sort of gives a whole setting.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you have any feedback from that? Because it looks great.
This was this was a very, very interesting discussion. We had a curved wall, which was the first discussion, and then the curved wall had doors, like 10 doors. And once you do a curved wall with 10 doors, it just looks really bad, because the doors are straight. And so we said, like, each one has his own room. Like, you come as a private patient, you pay money, and you want your own address. So we said each one gets a double curved facade. And I mean, this is just styrofoam cut and glued to it, but it was quite expensive. And the client said at some point, we have to cost evaluate, and we cut this. A curved wall is nice and it looks good. At this point, this was meeting my office, I handed him the drawings and said, you can leave. And I never did this in my whole life. And the client really excused and stayed, and now he's so happy. And he said, this is so amazing how it looks. I mean, this was a very tense moment at this project, but this is the whole project, and that's what it's about. And that's what I'm saying. We sacrificed a lot of other different things, but I told him this is the essence of the project, and the essence of the project has to be built through. And people really love it, and on the first day, they had 4,000 people looking at this, at 400 square meter. So. No, that was very, very good point at.
We're good for you. Let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.